Afternoon, everybody. As Ricardo indicated, our webinar today is U.S. and EU medical devices, international regulatory compliance and regulatory affairs. Now, to just review this topic as we begin, it's important to understand how regulatory agencies function and the specific medical device regulations that exist within the anchor jurisdictions. And relative to our webinar today, those jurisdictions would be the U.S. and the EU. And in terms of how they apply and how they help maintain sound medical device compliance. Now, this webinar is really designed to help you with the basics of regulatory compliance for medical devices. A broad subject. We only have an hour, and we'll try to touch upon all the high points as we go. Now, today, with the EU's new medical device regulation to be law fully implemented in 2020, and the complexities of medical device regulations here in the U.S., it's critical to effective regulatory compliance at all levels of management, all along the supply chain. Really understand how the process works and have at least a basic understanding of the key regulations and their contents. Now, medical device manufacturers are not only self-regulated, but they're also regulated by numerous local and national governmental agencies. As such, medical device manufacturers are regulated by various laws and regulations and standards and guidelines that are really written and adopted by industry and governmental agencies. Now, medical device regulations in the U.S. and the EU are really foundational to the remainder of the regulations that are applied to the medical devices really throughout the world. Now, this webinar will provide some basic information concerning the regulatory content common to all regulations, really to create a foundation for understanding the basics, of medical device compliance. We'll then discuss the meaning of regulatory compliance from both an internal company and external regulatory body standpoint. To establish clarity and common understanding, we'll discuss and define the differences between the common regulatory terms that you hear often, law, regulation, directive, standard, and guidance, and explore how they impact and what impact they have upon compliance. Now, the FDA's 21 CFR 820, which is the quality system regulation, really is an essential part of the entire medical device regulatory portfolio, and is critical to any discussion of medical device regulations. We'll take the time to discuss the key components of this regulation in terms of how it relates to the total quality system concept. We'll complete and get to the end with a discussion of the new EU medical device regulation. Now, these are basically the topics that I just discussed. I've given you pretty much a brief rundown of what we're going to talk about. So we'll just go ahead and move right into the content of our webinar. Now, let's quickly establish really the foundation by quickly looking at some of the common medical device laws and regulations and the commonalities that you'll see and that you see among them. Now, medical device companies, as I stated, are not only self-regulated, but they're also regulated by, as I said again, by numerous local and national governmental agencies. Now, as such, the medical device companies really have to abide by various laws, regulations, standards, and guidelines written by governmental agencies, also to include, and you'll see listed here, ISO documents. Now, the key message really that I want to send in this webinar is that the regulations created here in the U.S. and the EU, really to include the ISO documentation, are really foundational, as I've indicated, to really the rest of the world in terms of how individual regulations are created. Now, just about every law, regulation, and standard addresses each of the topics listed here, really in varying levels of detail. Now, these topics generally include regulatory compliance, quality systems, good manufacturing practices, registration and licensing, product classification, product submissions, product and or site approvals and or certifications, product labeling, quality complaints, vigilance activities, and product recalls. So there is a commonality there. Now, Oh, there we go. Now, we can begin, and what I'd like to do now is to look at some of the, or look at the major question that we pose here in this webinar, and that's really what is regulatory compliance. Now, regulatory compliance, it really is defined as the extent to which a company follows external governmental and industrial laws, directives, regulations, and standards. And it's important to note that this definition it really is not just limited to life sciences regulations. You know, we're talking about the entire alphabet soup of regulatory agencies, certainly with the FDA and OSHA with safety and EEOC with hiring and accounting and reporting, the IRS, and environmental regulations, the EPA and the Drug Enforcement Agency. So there's